Tonight on Midnight Files, we're talking about a cult so disturbing, so brutal, and so hard to believe that even now it feels less like a real criminal case and more like something out of a nightmare. It was called the Ant Hill Kids, and behind it was a man named Roch Thériault, a self-proclaimed prophet from Canada who called himself Moses. He founded the group in 1977, pulling followers into an apocalyptic commune built around his teachings, first in Quebec and later near Burnt River, Ontario. What began as a so-called spiritual movement turned into years of absolute control, torture, sexual abuse, forced medical procedures, and murder. At first, Thériault sold his followers a fantasy. He preached about purity, survival, religion, and the end of the world. He convinced people to leave behind their families, jobs, and normal lives so they could live under his rule in isolation. He made them work endlessly, building the commune while he positioned himself as a holy figure. That's where the name came from. He watched them work like ants, and the group became known as the Ant Hill Kids. But isolation was only the beginning. Inside the commune, Thériault's control turned sadistic. Reports tied to the case described followers being beaten, humiliated, and tortured if they disobeyed him or tried to leave. Members were forced to endure horrifying punishments. Some were made to injure themselves or each other to prove loyalty. Children were abused too. Over time, Thériault began performing grotesque amateur surgeries on followers with no medical training and no anesthesia, claiming he had healing powers. One of the most important names in this case is Gabrielle Lavallée. Her survival is one of the reasons the world even knows what happened inside that commune. According to court reporting, Lavallée described repeated assaults over months. In one incident, Thériault pulled at least 8 teeth from her jaw while drunk. In another, he drove a knife through the back of her hand and pinned it to a table. Later, after more violence, her arm was amputated at the commune. On August 14, 1989, Lavallée escaped and got help. That escape shattered the secrecy around the Ant Hill Kids, and once police moved in, this stopped being a whispered rumor in the woods and became a full criminal case. Contemporary reporting says Roch Thériault and 3 followers, Jacques Giguère, Nicole Ruel, and Chantal Labrie, were arrested in 1989 after Lavallée escaped. Court coverage from the time says all 4 pleaded guilty to assault-related charges. Thériault received a 12-year prison sentence on 3 counts of aggravated assault and 1 charge of unlawfully causing bodily harm. Giguère received 5 years. Labrie got 2 years less a day, plus probation, and Ruel received 18 months plus probation. But Gabrielle's case was not the end of it. Investigators uncovered an even darker case involving cult member Solange Boilard. In court reporting, later summarized from the case, Boilard was subjected to one of Thériault's ritualized surgeries after complaining of stomach pain. He cut into her abdomen and pulled out part of what appeared to be her intestine. She died in agony, and her remains were later found on the commune property in 1989. A preliminary hearing began in 1990. Thériault was first facing a first-degree murder charge, but was eventually committed to stand trial on the lesser charge of second-degree murder. Then in January 1993, Thériault entered a surprise guilty plea to second-degree murder in Boilard's death. He was sentenced to life in prison, with parole eligibility after 10 years. Court reporting at the time described just how horrific Boilard's death had been, and said Thériault had even turned her remains into ritual objects for the commune. It is one of the most grotesque cult murder cases in Canadian history. And what makes this story even more disturbing is that it didn't happen overnight. This wasn't one sudden crime. This was years of manipulation, years of fear, years of convincing people that pain was purification and violence was spiritual duty. Followers didn't just obey him. Many were broken down until they saw him as a prophet, even after the abuse became impossible to ignore. In court, some of the people around him still defended him, even after Gabrielle Lavallee's testimony described what had happened. That is what makes cults so terrifying. The violence is brutal, but the psychological control is even worse. And the ending was just as dark as the story itself. Thériault remained in prison for years after his conviction. Then on February 26, 2011, he was killed inside Dorchester Penitentiary in New Brunswick after an altercation with another inmate, Matthew Gerard MacDonald. MacDonald was initially charged with first-degree murder. In 2012, he pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and received a sentence that made him ineligible for parole for 25 years. So when people talk about the most disturbing cults ever uncovered, the Anthill Kids always belongs near the top. Because this wasn't just brainwashing. It wasn't just religious extremism. It was torture, mutilation, murder, and years of absolute control hidden inside a remote commune until one survivor finally escaped and exposed it. And that's the part that stays with you. If Gabrielle Lavallee had not made it out of those woods, how much longer would it have gone on? How many more people would have died? And how many horrors inside that commune were never fully uncovered? This was the Anthill Kids, one of the most disturbing cult cases ever exposed. And on Midnight Files, it's a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters don't hide in fiction. They build churches. They call themselves prophets. And they convince people to follow them straight into hell.